Victor Haldren's hands were already around her collar before she could say a single word. No warning, no hesitation. He slammed Maya Carter into the rooftop railing with the full force of a man who had already decided she was already dead. She clawed at his wrists. He didn't flinch. He looked her straight in the eyes, and what she saw there wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It was something far colder than either of those things. It was certainty. Then he shoved her over the edge of a 7-story building and stood there watching her fall into the darkness below. And he smiled. That smile is where this story truly begins. If this kind of story moves you, please take a second to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because this story starts long before that rooftop. Maya Carter did not talk much. That was the first thing people noticed about her. In a hospital full of noise, full of voices overlapping in hallways, and intercoms crackling and monitors beeping, Maya moved through it all like still water. She showed up on time, she did her job, she said what needed to be said, and she went home. Or at least, that was what people assumed she did. No one really knew where she went after her shift ended. No one had ever asked. She had started at Crestview General Hospital on a Monday morning in early November. The air outside was sharp with cold, the kind of Seattle cold that gets into your bones before you have a chance to button your coat. She walked through the main entrance of the emergency department carrying a small bag and a paper cup of black coffee. No cream, no sugar. She checked in at the nursing station, introduced herself to the charge nurse, a woman named Donna, who had been at Crestview for 19 years and had seen enough new hires to know within 5 minutes whether someone was going to last. And Maya said 3 sentences total. Her name, that she had completed her orientation packet, and that she was ready to start. Donna looked at her for a long moment. Then she handed her a badge and pointed down the hall. That was it. No small talk. No questions about where she was from or where she had worked before. Something about Maya made the usual social rituals feel unnecessary, like offering an umbrella to someone who had already walked through a hurricane. By the end of her first shift, the other nurses were already talking about her in the break room. Not unkindly, more like the way people talk when they witness something they cannot entirely explain. She restocked every crash cart in the department before noon, said a young nurse named Priya, stirring her coffee slowly. Without being asked. She found a pressure error on a patient chart in room 4, added another nurse, Kevin, leaning against the counter. The doctor had already signed off on it. Did she say anything about it? She just left a sticky note. A sticky note. A sticky note. There was a silence in the break room that was almost reverent. Nobody knew where Maya Carter had come from. Her resume said she had nursing credentials from a respected program, that she had some prior medical experience, and that she had taken several years away from the field. The gap in her employment history was listed simply as prior service. No one pushed further. HR had processed her application the way they processed hundreds of others. Crestview was a busy hospital with chronic staffing shortages, and a qualified ER nurse who passed her background check and showed up on time was not something you interrogated too closely. What nobody in that hospital knew, not Donna, not Priya, not Kevin, not a single person on the administrative staff, was that those several years of prior service had nothing to do with any civilian job. Maya Carter had spent 6 years as a combat medic attached to a United States Navy SEAL team, running classified missions in places that never made the news, doing things that would never appear on any document cleared for public reading. She had kept people alive in the field with her bare hands and whatever was in her kit. She had made decisions under fire that no textbook ever trained you for. She had been shot at, ambushed, buried in rubble, and left for dead once in a situation that her commanding officer later called the most harrowing extraction in the unit's recorded history. And she had survived all of it. She never talked about any of this, not because she was hiding it, simply because it was not relevant to the work in front of her. What mattered was the patient in Bay 3. What mattered was the rhythm on the monitor. What mattered was right now. That was Maya Carter's entire philosophy, reduced to 3 words. Right now, this. The trouble started on her 3rd day. It was a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of shift where the ER moved in waves, quiet for an hour, and then suddenly overwhelming with no warning in between. Maya was charting at the nursing station when the doors burst open and the paramedics came through fast, calling out vitals as they rolled a gurney through the corridor. The patient was a man in his mid-70s, well-dressed even in crisis, which told you something about who he was. His face was gray and slack, and the paramedic doing compressions called out without stopping. Gerald Whitman, 73, sudden cardiac arrest, found unresponsive at home by his housekeeper, estimated 8 minutes down before we arrived, been working him the whole way in. The trauma team moved in, doctors and nurses converging on the bay with the practiced urgency of people who had done this hundreds of times. Maya was not the primary nurse on the case, but she positioned herself at the edge of the bay, watching, the way she always did, cataloging information without anyone asking her to. What happened next happened fast. The senior cardiologist working the case called for a 2nd round of epinephrine. The team was following protocol. Compressions continued. The defibrillator had been used twice. The monitor showed nothing convincing. And then, from the doorway of the emergency department, a man in a suit walked in. Victor Haldren was not supposed to be in the ER. The CEO of a hospital did not routinely appear on the floor during active resuscitations. His domain was the boardroom, the executive suite on the 8th floor, the conference calls and budget meetings and public-facing charity events that kept the hospital's reputation polished. But Gerald Whitman was not an ordinary patient. Gerald Whitman was on the hospital foundation board. Gerald Whitman's family had donated a surgical wing, and someone had called Victor the moment the paramedics radioed in the name. He walked into the trauma bay like he owned it, because in every practical sense he did. "How long has he been down?" Victor asked. His voice was measured, authoritative, the voice of a man who was used to people stopping what they were doing when he spoke. "Close to 12 minutes total," the cardiologist answered. Victor looked at the monitor. He looked at the patient. He looked at the team around the bed. And then he said quietly and with complete certainty the words that changed everything. "Call it. There's no meaningful brain activity possible at this point. He's gone. I'm calling it." The room paused. Not a long pause, just a fraction of a second. But it was there. The cardiologist hesitated. "We could do another round." I said, "Call it." Victor's voice did not rise. It did not need to. I was a physician for 15 years before I moved into administration. I know what I'm looking at. This man is gone. We are not prolonging this for the sake of appearances. Call the time. People began to step back from the bed, and that was when Maya looked at the monitor. Everyone else had looked at it and seen what Victor told them to see. A flatline story, a foregone conclusion. Maya looked at it and saw something else. A flicker, barely there. A pattern that was not random noise. She moved before she decided to move. That was the seal in her, the part that had been trained past the point where hesitation was an option. She reached past a resident who was already stepping away from the bed. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles, she called out, "Clear," and she delivered a shock to Gerald Whitman's chest. The room went absolutely silent. Victor Haldren turned around. On the monitor, after 3 full seconds that felt like 3 years, a rhythm appeared. Weak, irregular, but unmistakably there. Gerald Whitman's heart was beating. Someone said something. Maya did not register who it was or what they said. She was already calling out instructions, asking for specific medications, checking the patient's airway, moving with the economy of motion of someone who had stabilized people in far worse conditions, in far worse places. It was only after Gerald Whitman was stable and being transferred to the cardiac care unit that Maya became aware of the silence around her. She looked up from the chart she was completing and found herself standing in a bay full of people who were all looking at her. And Victor Haldren was standing in the doorway. He was not looking at Gerald Whitman. He was not looking at the monitor that now showed a steady rhythm. He was looking at Maya. And the expression on his face was not the expression of a man who was relieved that a patient had survived. It was the expression of a man who had just had something taken from him, something he considered his. "You're the new nurse," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Maya said. She held his gaze because she had been trained in environments where looking away was a tactical disadvantage. And that training did not switch off just because she was in a hospital corridor. "What is your name?" "Maya Carter." Victor Haldren looked at her for a moment that went on slightly too long. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked out of the department. The team around Maya slowly exhaled. Someone clapped her on the shoulder. Priya said something like, "That was incredible." The cardiologist shook his head slowly, with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something like concern. Maya went back to her chart. She had not done anything extraordinary. She had seen something true, and she had acted on it. That was all. She did not know, could not have known in that moment, that the expression on Victor Haldren's face as he walked out of that bay was not the end of something. It was the beginning. Victor Haldren had built Crestview General into a regional powerhouse over 13 years of what the local press called visionary leadership. He was photographed at galas. He sat on state health policy committees. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in headlines followed by words like innovative and transformative and pioneering. He was also the kind of man who kept secrets. The secrets were not small ones. For the past 4 years, Victor had been running a billing scheme so sophisticated that even the hospital's own finance team had not caught it. Ghost procedures, phantom consultations, charge submitted for services that either never happened or were dramatically inflated, funneled through a network of shell billing entities that Victor's attorney, a sharp and morally flexible man named David Chen, had helped him construct. The money that came back was considerable, several $1,000,000 over 4 years, parked in accounts that were technically clean on their surface. The scheme had exactly one vulnerability. It required cooperation from people inside the hospital who processed certain specific authorizations, and those authorizations occasionally touched real patient files. Gerald Whitman's file was one of those files. A phantom cardiology consultation had been billed to Whitman's insurance 3 months ago, an appointment that never took place. It was a small line item in a very large scheme, but it was a thread. And if Gerald Whitman recovered consciousness, if he began reviewing his medical records the way alert, wealthy people with lawyers sometimes did, that thread could be pulled. Victor had calculated the odds and determined they were acceptable. Whitman was supposed to be dead, not because Victor had done anything to him directly, but because when a 73-year-old man with a cardiac history went down hard, the probability of survival was low. Victor had simply arrived to ensure the probability landed the right way. And then a nurse he had never seen before had shocked the man back to life in front of an entire trauma team. In his office that evening, Victor sat alone for a long time. He opened the file his administrative assistant had pulled together on Maya Carter. It was thin, frustratingly thin. Employment dates, nursing credentials, a school in the Pacific Northwest, and then, where a work history should have been, a gap with the notation prior service and nothing else. He made a call to a man he sometimes used for sensitive inquiries, a former private investigator who had done background work for the hospital in contract disputes. He gave the man Maya's name and told him he needed everything. 3 days later, the man called back. "I can't get much," he said, and the hesitation in his voice was unusual for someone Victor had never heard hesitate before. "Her military records are sealed, like genuinely sealed, not just bureaucratic slow. I hit a wall that had a federal address on it. There's a 6-year gap, and whatever she was doing in that time is classified at a level that I don't have access to, and neither does anyone I know." Victor was quiet on the phone. "What branch?" he asked. "Navy. That's as far as I got." After he hung up, Victor sat with that information for a long time. A classified military background, a nursing career that started only recently, and the kind of calm under pressure that he had seen in that trauma bay. The kind of calm that did not come from nursing school. It came from somewhere else, somewhere harder. A different kind of man might have recognized what he was dealing with and stepped carefully. A wiser man might have promoted Maya Carter to a position that kept her far from Gerald Whitman's chart, given her a raise, kept her quiet and content, and away from anything that could cause problems. Victor Haldren was not that kind of man. What he felt when he thought about Maya Carter was not fear. It was something older and more dangerous than fear. It was the rage of a man who had controlled everything around him for 13 years, and who now felt, for the first time in a very long time, like something was outside his control. Like there was a variable in his system that he had not put there and could not predict. He did not like variables. He began laying the groundwork the same week. It was subtle, the way the beginning of a trap always is. A note in Maya's personnel file questioning a charting entry from her first week. A complaint routed through the nursing supervisor, anonymous, claiming she had been aggressive in the Whitman resuscitation in a way that overstepped her authority. Nothing that would result in termination, just the beginning of a paper trail. Just the start of a narrative that could be used later if it needed to be. Maya noticed. She was not the kind of person who missed things. The nursing supervisor, a woman named Patricia Howell, who had been at Crestview for 12 years, and who Maya had already identified as someone who deferred to power rather than principle, called her in for a brief meeting on Friday afternoon. She told Maya that there had been some concerns raised about her conduct during the Whitman case, that some of the physicians felt she had acted outside her role, that it might be worth Maya being a little less, and Patricia had paused here, searching for the word, a little less visible. Maya looked at her. "Gerald Whitman is alive," she said. Patricia smiled the smile of someone delivering a message she had been given to deliver. "Of course, and that's wonderful, but we want to make sure everyone on the team feels respected, and that protocol is—" "Was there a formal complaint?" Maya asked. Another pause. "It was more of an informal concern." "From whom?" Patricia did not answer that. She just kept smiling. Maya thanked her and left the office. In the hallway, she stood for a moment, not because she was shaken, because she was thinking. She had spent 6 years reading environments, reading the space between words, reading what people were not saying as much as what they were. What she had just been told, translated from its polite institutional language into plain speech, was this. Someone with authority wanted her to make herself smaller. Someone was building a file on her. And the timing was not a coincidence. She went back to her shift. She said nothing to anyone about what she was thinking, but she started paying closer attention. Over the following 2 weeks, she did her job exactly as before, impeccably, carefully, with the kind of precision that gave no one anything real to work with. She noticed which nurses reported directly to Patricia Howell. She noticed when Tom Briggs, the head of hospital security, walked through the ER floor in the evenings at times that did not correspond to any usual security round. She noticed that David Chen, the hospital attorney, had visited Victor's office 3 times in a single week, which was notable because Chen normally came in once a month. She did not know what they were planning, not yet, but she knew the shape of what was forming. She had been in enough hostile environments to recognize the difference between ambient danger and targeted danger. What she was feeling was targeted. And then the message came. It arrived through the nursing supervisor's office, forwarded from the administrative team. Maya was asked to report to the rooftop access area, the helipad level, at 9:15 on Tuesday evening. The message said there were questions about her nursing credentials, that needed to be addressed in person before the licensing board review scheduled for the following week. It said her position at Crestview might be in jeopardy if the matter was not resolved. Maya read the message twice. She sat with it. 9:15 on a Tuesday night. The Rooftop. Alone. A threat to her nursing license as the mechanism to get her there. She thought about the security footage she had noticed near the helipad level during a shift change one evening. 2 of the 4 cameras covering that access corridor had been repositioned. The adjustment was small. Most people would not have noticed it. Maya had noticed it because she had been trained to notice exactly that kind of thing, the kind of change that creates a blind spot. She understood what she was being invited to. She also understood what she was going to do. She was going to go. Not because she was naive, not because she had missed the signs. She was going to go because she had something that Victor Haldren did not know she had, and the only way to use it was to walk into the room. She changed into her civilian clothes at the end of her shift, a dark jacket and comfortable shoes. She did not bring anything that would look out of place. She took the service elevator to the rooftop level because she knew the layout of the building. She had memorized it in her first week, the way she memorized every building she occupied. The rooftop access door opened onto the helipad. The wind off the sound was cold and direct. The city spread out below in light. Victor was there. So were Tom Briggs, standing to the left, Patricia Howell, off to the right, and David Chen, partially behind the doorframe. 4 people, a contained space, controlled exit points. Maya stood in the middle of it and looked at Victor Haldren. "You wanted to see me," she said. Victor's face in that moment was the face of a man who had already made his decision and was only completing a transaction. There was no anger in it, no emotion she could name, just the flat efficiency of someone finishing a task. "I did," he said. "There's no licensing issue. I think you already know that." "I do," Maya said. "Then you also know this conversation has only one way it ends." Maya looked at him, at Tom Briggs, at Patricia Howell, whose hands were shaking, at David Chen, who could not quite meet her eyes. 4 against 1, she said, not frightened, just observational, filing the fact away. "You should not have saved him," Victor said. "You should have let the moment pass. Instead, you made yourself a problem I cannot afford." "Gerald Whitman is a person," Maya said quietly. Victor's expression did not change. "Gerald Whitman is a liability, and so are you." He gave a small nod, and all 4 of them moved at once. Maya had anticipated the moment the way she had been trained to anticipate ambushes. She moved, she fought. She was good and she was fast, and under different circumstances with different numbers, she might have controlled it. But the rooftop was small, and Tom Briggs was large and trained in his own right. And Patricia Howell came in from the side in a way Maya had not fully accounted for. And in the chaos of bodies and hands, and the edge of the roof getting closer than it had any right to get, Victor Haldren grabbed her by the collar with both hands, and he shoved her, and she went over the edge. 7 stories, the city below, the air, and then nothing. Except it was not nothing. It was a maintenance awning 15 feet below the rooftop edge that Maya had clocked on her way up the service stairs. Noted the position of without knowing why she was noting it, because that was what her training had made her. A person who always tracked the geometry of a space. She hit it. She rolled. She dropped onto a balcony. She lay there for a moment in the cold dark, with broken ribs making every breath a bright, specific agony, with blood running warm down the side of her face, with her left wrist sending information she interpreted as a sprain and set aside as non-critical. She looked up. 4 faces peered over the rooftop edge and stared down at her. She looked back at them. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone, which was cracked but functional, and she made the first of 3 phone calls that would end Victor Haldren's life as he knew it. In the silence of the rooftop above her, 4 people stared down at the woman they had just tried to kill. The woman who was alive. The woman who was already talking to someone on the phone, calm and precise and methodical, in a voice that did not waver even once. Patricia Howell said, in a whisper that was almost a prayer, "What did we do?" Nobody answered her, because there was no answer that helped them anymore. The phone was cracked down the middle, a jagged split running from the top corner to the center of the screen, but it still lit up when Maya pressed the button. That was all she needed. She was lying on the balcony with her back against the exterior wall of the 6th floor, her ribs screaming with every inhale, blood from a cut above her left temple running in a thin, warm line down the side of her face, and she was already dialing. Her first call lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She spoke without rushing, without emotion bleeding into her tone. She gave a name, a location, a summary of what had just occurred on the rooftop of Crestview General Hospital, and a specific request. The person on the other end of the line asked her twice if she was safe. Both times she said yes. Both times she meant it in the only way that mattered to her, which was that she was breathing and thinking and capable of completing the task in front of her. When she hung up, she heard something above her. A door. The access door to the helipad level, being opened slowly, carefully, the way a person opens a door when they are trying not to be heard. Maya did not move from her position. She listened. One set of footsteps, not 4. Someone had been sent to check. She stayed still and kept her breathing shallow and controlled, the way she had learned to do in places where being heard meant not coming home. And after 40 seconds, the footsteps stopped, hovered, then retreated back through the door. She exhaled. Then she made her second call. This one was shorter. She spoke to a woman named Agent Diane Forsyth, a name she had been given 3 years ago by a former SEAL teammate who now worked federal investigations, and who had told her, with the casual certainty of someone who meant every word, that if she ever found herself inside something she could not handle alone, this was the number. Maya had never used it before tonight. She used it now. Forsyth picked up on the second ring, which told Maya either the woman never slept or had been expecting this call for reasons Maya did not yet understand. Maya explained the situation in under 2 minutes. Forsyth listened without interrupting, which was the mark of someone who knew how to hear information without letting their reaction slow the intake of it. When Maya finished, there was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. "Are you injured?" Forsyth asked. "Ribs, wrist, head laceration, functional. Do not go back inside the hospital." "I wasn't planning to." "I need you to stay on that balcony until I confirm a secure extraction. 15 minutes. "Understood." She hung up, made her third call. And this one was the quietest of the 3, and in some ways the most important, because it was to a man named Ronald Gibbs, who served on the hospital's board of directors, and who had, over the past 6 months, been quietly developing his own suspicions about the way certain billing authorizations were being routed through Victor Haldren's administrative office. Ronald Gibbs was 70 years old, had been in healthcare administration for 4 decades, and was not a man who frightened easily. When Maya told him what had happened on the rooftop, he was silent for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." "I'll tell you everything," Maya said. "But first there's something you need to know about a maintenance camera near the helipad access corridor." The camera was the detail that Victor had miscalculated on. Not by much. Victor was meticulous, and he had been meticulous about this. He had identified every camera in the rooftop access zone and confirmed, through Tom Briggs, that 2 of them had been repositioned to create a blind spot directly over the helipad. What nobody had accounted for was the 3rd camera, a maintenance unit mounted on the exterior ventilation housing at the northeast corner of the building that had been knocked out of alignment 3 weeks earlier during a storm. It had been long for repair and not yet serviced. Its angle shifted 15 degrees from its intended position by the force of the wind that night, now captured a direct view of the helipad edge. It had been recording the entire time. Maya knew about that camera because she had seen the maintenance ticket on a shared facilities board and noted it the same week she noticed the repositioned security cameras. And her brain had connected the two data points without being asked to, the way it had always connected things, quietly and without ceremony, in the background while the rest of her was doing something else. She did not tell Victor this. She told Ronald Gibbs. And Gibbs, who was already reaching for his phone before the call was finished, understood immediately what it meant. It meant there was footage. Upstairs in the executive conference room adjacent to Victor's office, 4 people were in the process of destroying themselves, though none of them had fully understood that yet. Victor was pacing. Tom Briggs was sitting with his elbows on the table and his face in his hands. Patricia Howell had been crying for the past 10 minutes, not out of remorse, or not primarily out of remorse, but out of the specific terror of a person who has just realized the thing they agreed to be part of is far larger than it appeared when they agreed to it. David Chen was on his phone, typing rapidly, the kind of frantic digital movement that meant he was either contacting someone or deleting something, or both. "She's gone," Tom said, and his voice was rough. "I checked. She's not on the balcony." "What do you mean she's not on the balcony?" Victor stopped pacing. "I mean she's not there. I looked down. The balcony is empty." Victor stared at him. "That's a 6-story drop from the balcony to the street." "I know what it is. She had broken ribs. She had a head injury. She could not have—" "Victor." David Chen looked up from his phone for the first time since they had come inside. His voice had a quality in it that cut through everything else in the room. The particular flatness of a man delivering information he does not want to deliver. "She made a phone call." Silence. "How do you know that?" Victor asked. "Because I have a contact in building security who monitors outgoing calls from this zone, and one of the nurse's personal lines just placed 3 calls in the last 12 minutes from the 6th floor exterior level." Victor's face did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted in a way that Tom Briggs, who had known him for 8 years, had never seen before. It was the first genuine fear he had ever seen on Victor Haldren's face, and it lasted only a second before Victor's expression locked back down into something controlled and cold. "Who did she call?" "I only have 2 of the numbers. One is registered to a board member, Ronald Gibbs." Patricia Howell made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. "And the other?" Victor asked. Chen looked at his phone screen. "Federal." The word landed in the room like something physical. Tom Briggs stood up. Victor, I need you to listen to me very carefully right now. Whatever we thought this was going to be, it is not that anymore. We need to think about—" "Sit down, Tom." "I am not going to sit down. She is alive. She called the FBI. She called Ronald Gibbs, who has been sniffing around the billing structure for 6 months. Victor, she was never just a nurse. We knew that going in, and we still—" "Sit down." Tom Briggs sat down. Not because he was afraid of Victor. He sat down because he was afraid of what he was going to say next if he stayed standing. And saying it out loud in front of David Chen felt like a step he could not take back. Patricia was no longer crying. She was staring at the table with an expression that was beyond tears. A hollow, evacuated look of someone watching their entire future rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. "My kids," she said very quietly, to no one in particular. "My kids are 14 and 11. No one responded to that either. Victor walked to the window and stood with his back to the room. He was quiet for a long time. When he turned around, his voice was completely steady. "We have a window. It is a small window, but it exists. The camera coverage on the rooftop was managed. Without footage, without a corroborating witness who can place all 4 of us in that specific location at that specific time, what we have is her word against ours. A new nurse with a classified military background and possible psychological issues from her service, making an accusation against the CEO of a major hospital and 3 senior staff members. Without evidence, this is manageable. David Chen was shaking his head slowly. Victor, without evidence, Victor repeated. I need to tell you something, Chen said. He set his phone down on the table. He looked at Victor with the expression of a man who has been carrying information and has just decided the weight of it is no longer worth carrying. There is a maintenance camera on the northeast exterior housing. I found out about it 20 minutes ago from the facilities log. It was knocked out of alignment in the storm 3 weeks back. It has not been repaired yet. Victor was very still. Its current angle, Chen continued, covers the helipad edge. Nobody spoke. Tom Briggs looked at the ceiling. Patricia Howe put both hands flat on the table as if she needed it to stay upright. And Victor Howdron, for the second time in one night, felt something he had not felt in 13 years. The sensation of a structure he had built with tremendous care beginning to move beneath him. Can it be accessed? Victor asked. His voice was still steady. That was the thing about Victor, even now. The footage is automatically backed up off-site. It has been since the system upgrade in September. Chen paused. I authorized that upgrade. Another silence. You authorized it, Victor said. Yes. So you're telling me that the footage from tonight is already in a location we cannot reach. That is what I'm telling you. Victor turned back to the window. Outside, the city continued to exist in complete indifference to what was happening in this room. Lights moved. People went on with their lives. The hospital below hummed with the ordinary, urgent business of keeping people alive. Then we have a different kind of problem, Victor said softly, and we need to think about it differently. But the thinking was already over. They just did not know it yet. At 11:47 that same night, Ronald Gibbs made 2 calls of his own. The first was to the board's legal counsel. The second was to the chairman of the hospital oversight committee, a man named Howard Park, who had an unlisted number that Ronald had memorized for exactly the kind of emergency that should, in a well-run institution, never actually occur. Park listened without speaking for most of the call. At the end, he said 4 words. I'll be there tomorrow. He meant the hospital. He meant early. By midnight, 3 things had happened that Victor did not know about. Federal agent Diane Forsyth had dispatched a 2-person team to retrieve Maya Carter from a location 2 blocks from the hospital where she had been taken by a civilian contact, a former teammate who had driven 40 minutes in under 30 to reach her. Maya had refused to go to a hospital, which the paramedic in the car found both professionally frustrating and entirely unsurprising, given everything she had already told him. She had her ribs wrapped in the back seat with materials from a kit she had insisted on keeping herself, and she was already reviewing everything she remembered about the maintenance camera footage schedule on a borrowed laptop. Her face pale and tight with pain, but her eyes completely clear. The second thing that happened was that Tom Briggs, sitting alone in his car in the hospital parking structure at 12:15 in the morning, called his wife. He talked to her for 40 minutes. He did not tell her everything, but he told her enough. And when he finally went quiet, she said, Tom, you need to call a lawyer tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. He already knew she was right. He had known it since the moment he watched Maya Carter go over the edge of that rooftop, and felt something inside himself that had nothing to do with strategy or self-preservation. Something older and heavier than either of those things. He had felt it the moment she went over, and he had been carrying it ever since, and he was very, very tired of its weight. The third thing that happened was that Patricia Howe went home, sat in her kitchen with all the lights on, and wrote 3 pages longhand in a notebook she then put in an envelope with her daughter's name on it. She did not mail it, she just put it there, for what it was worth. In the morning, Crestview General Hospital opened the way it always did. Patients came in. Staff arrived for their shifts. The cafeteria served breakfast. The intercom announced names and room numbers and code calls with its usual flat efficiency. From the outside, nothing was different. And then the cars arrived. 3 of them, federal plates. Parking in the administrative lot at 7:42 in the morning, which was early enough that the shift change in the ER was still ongoing, and several nurses saw the cars from the window and said nothing at first, just watched with the instinctive alertness of people who have worked emergency medicine long enough to recognize the particular quality of a moment that is about to become significant. The agents went directly to the administrative level. They did not stop at reception. They had already been in contact with Ronald Gibbs and with Howard Park, who had arrived at 6:30 and had spent the past hour in the boardroom with the hospital's legal counsel, going through documents that Chen, in his panic the night before, had not managed to delete completely, because deleting a document from a shared system and actually removing it from existence are two very different things, and it takes more than one frightened night to understand the difference. Victor Haldren was in his office when they came through the door. He was behind his desk. He was wearing his full suit. He had come in early, which his assistant had found unusual and said nothing about. He looked like a man who had prepared for a meeting, which in a way was exactly what this was. The lead agent, a composed woman in her 40s who introduced herself without theatrical ceremony, told him he was being placed under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. She told him he had the right to remain silent. She told him everything the law required her to tell him. And Victor Haldren sat behind his desk and listened to all of it without moving. Then he said very quietly, "Where is she?" The agent looked at him. "Mr. Haldren, Maya Carter, where is she?" "She is safe," the agent said, "and she is currently giving her statement." Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and held out his wrists. There was no anger in it, no performance, no final declaration. Just a man at the end of a very long road, finally arriving at the place where the road ended. In the ER 2 floors below, Kevin and Priya were watching through the window as Victor Haldren was walked to a federal vehicle in the parking lot. Priya had her arms folded across her chest. Kevin had his hands in his pockets. They stood there without speaking for a while. Then Kevin said, "The new nurse, Maya, is she?" "She called it in herself," Priya said. "That's what I heard." Kevin exhaled slowly. "Of course she did." Tom Briggs had called his lawyer at 12:30 the previous night and had been advised to cooperate fully, which he was already inclined to do before the lawyer said it. By 9 in the morning, he was sitting in a federal field office, giving a statement that was thorough and specific, and that covered not only the events of the previous night, but a number of other events that his lawyer advised him to include, and that Victor Haldren's lawyer, across town, would spend the next 2 weeks trying to contextualize in a way that helped no one. Patricia Howell arrived at the federal office at 10:15. She had the notebook with her, not the envelope, just the notebook itself. She sat down across from an investigator and she put the notebook on the table, and she said, before anyone had asked her anything, "I want to tell you everything. I need to tell you everything. I have 14 and 11-year-old kids at home, and I need them to know that when it mattered, I told the truth." David Chen did not come in voluntarily. He arrived later that afternoon with 2 attorneys and a prepared statement that said nothing of substance, which the investigators had expected and which mattered very little given everything they already had. The footage from the maintenance camera had been retrieved and reviewed by mid-morning. It was clear. The angle was not perfect, but it was sufficient. 4 figures visible on the rooftop: the confrontation, the push, the fall. And 1 figure, smaller than the others, disappearing over the edge, and then the 4 remaining figures looking down, standing in the specific, frozen stillness of people who have just done something they cannot undo. Maya Carter watched the footage once, in a secure office, with 2 agents present, and her arm in a temporary brace, and her ribs wrapped, and a bandage above her left eye. She watched it all the way through without expression. When it was done, she turned to Agent Forsyth, who was standing beside her. "That's everything you need?" she asked. "That's everything we need," Forsyth said. Maya nodded. She looked at the frozen frame on the screen, the last image of the footage. Victor Haldren's face visible at the rooftop edge, looking down. He had that same expression she had seen in the trauma bay the day she saved Gerald Whitman. The expression of a man who had just lost something he considered his. "How is he doing?" Maya asked. "Whitman." Forsyth paused. "He's out of cardiac care. His family was with him this morning." Maya looked at the screen a moment longer. Then she pushed back from the table and stood up carefully, managing her ribs. And she said very simply, "Good." That was all. No satisfaction in her voice. No closure. Just the flat, clean acknowledgement of a fact that mattered. A man was alive who should be alive. And the person who had tried to prevent that was now in handcuffs, in the back of a federal vehicle. For Maya Carter, that was enough. It had always been enough. She had never needed it to be anything more than that. The statement Maya gave that morning ran to 47 pages. Not because she embellished, not because she dramatized, because she was precise. And precision takes space when you are describing a sequence of events that began 3 weeks before the night on the rooftop and involved people who had each played a specific role in something that was never supposed to come to light. She sat in that federal office for 4 hours and 20 minutes, and she answered every question with the same quality of attention she brought to everything. Direct, complete, nothing added that wasn't true, and nothing left out that was. Agent Forsyth sat across from her for most of it. At one point, about 2 hours in, she set down her pen and looked at Maya with an expression that was not quite professional neutrality anymore. "You knew what you were walking into that night," she said. "It was not a question." "I had a reasonable assessment of the situation," Maya said. "You walked onto a rooftop alone with 4 people who wanted you dead." "I needed them to act," Maya said. "Evidence of intent isn't enough. Evidence of action is something else." Forsyth was quiet for a moment. "You used yourself as bait." Maya looked at her steadily. "I used myself as a witness." There was a difference, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said anything more about it. By noon, the story had already begun to move. Not publicly yet, but inside the hospital, word travels the way it always travels in institutions where people work close together under pressure. In fragments and whispers, and the particular charged silence that falls over a break room when someone walks in who knows something everyone else can feel they know. Kevin heard it from a technician on the 4th floor. Priya heard it from Donna, who had heard it from someone in administration who had watched the federal agents take the service elevator up and come back down with Victor Haldren between them. By 1 o'clock, every nurse in the ER knew the outline of what had happened, even if the specifics were still incomplete. What they did not yet know was the full scope of what the federal investigation had already begun to uncover. Because Maya's 3 phone calls the night before had not only triggered an arrest, they had opened a door that revealed something much larger than one man's attempt to silence one nurse. The billing fraud was the thread that had been waiting to be pulled. Forsyth's team had been authorized to access Crestview General's financial records as part of the investigation into the attempted murder charge. And what they found in those records in the first 6 hours of review was enough to make the attempted murder charge look, in terms of sheer scale of harm, like the least of Victor Haldren's problems. 4 years of systematic fraud, ghost procedures, phantom consultations, hundreds of patients whose files had been used as vehicles for charges they never received, billed to insurance companies who had paid without question because the documentation was clean. The total figure, preliminary and still growing as analysts worked through the records, was somewhere north of $4 million. Gerald Whitman's file was one of 47 they had flagged by midday. The irony was not lost on anyone who understood the full picture. Victor had tried to let Whitman die to protect a single, fraudulent line item in a file that was one of dozens. If he had simply let Maya do her job that day in the trauma bay, if he had swallowed his ego and his fear and walked back out of that ER without saying a word, none of this would have been triggered. The fraud might have continued for years. Whitman might have recovered and never looked at his billing records closely enough to notice. The thread might never have been pulled. But Victor Haldren had needed to be the man who called it. He had needed to be the one in control of that room, and that need had cost him everything. Maya did not know the full scope of the financial investigation yet when she left the federal office at 2:15 that afternoon. She knew enough. She walked out into the cold afternoon air with her ribs wrapped and her wrist in a brace, and her face bearing a line of butterfly closures above her left eye. And she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Just breathed. The pain was specific and manageable. She had been in worse pain in worse places and kept moving, and she would keep moving now. Her phone rang. The number was one she recognized. It was Ronald Gibbs. "How are you?" he asked. His voice was the voice of a man who genuinely wanted to know. "I'm standing," she said. "That is considerably more than we had a right to expect given last night." He paused. "I want you to know that the board convened an emergency session this morning. Howard Park chaired it. What happened to you last night and what we are learning about the broader situation, these are not things this institution can move past without significant change." "Mr. Gibbs," Maya said, "with respect, that conversation can wait. I need to eat something and sleep for approximately 6 hours." He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes out of a person unexpectedly when they are too tired and too relieved to maintain their usual register. Of course. But Maya, I need you to know, when you're ready, there are conversations that need to happen, and you are central to them." "I'll be ready," she said. "Give me until tomorrow." She hung up. And then, because she was who she did not go directly to sleep. She went first to a pharmacy, bought the specific things she needed to properly manage her injuries through the night, and then she went to the apartment she had been renting since she arrived in Seattle. A small, sparsely furnished place that suited her the way spare things generally suited her. And she sat at the kitchen table and wrote down everything she remembered from the past 3 weeks in the order she remembered it. Not because anyone asked her to, but because documentation was a discipline, and disciplines did not take nights off. She wrote for 2 hours, then she slept. At 4:30 that same afternoon, David Chen's attorneys attempted their first significant legal maneuver. They filed a motion arguing that the footage from the maintenance camera had been obtained without a proper warrant and should be considered inadmissible. The motion was reviewed and denied by 6:15. The backup system that stored the footage off-site was a hospital asset, not a private one, and the board had voluntarily provided access the moment Howard Park walked into the building that morning. Chen's attorneys filed a second motion. That one was also denied. Chen, sitting in a conference room with his 2 lawyers and a cup of cold coffee, looked at the table in front of him and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "What's the realistic exposure here?" And one of his lawyers looked at him and said, very carefully, "David, I need you to think seriously about what cooperation looks like in this context." Chen closed his eyes. Across town, Tom Briggs was finishing his second session with the federal investigators. He had been talking for most of the day, not performing, not strategizing, just talking, the way a person talks when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time, and the act of setting it down is almost physical in its relief. He told them about the night on the rooftop in full detail. He told them about the 3 previous conversations he had been part of, where Victor had discussed Maya Carter as a problem that needed to be managed. He told them about the billing authorizations he had seen routed through security infrastructure in ways he had not understood at the time, but understood now. He gave them names, dates, specific conversations he could place in specific rooms at specific times. When he was done, the investigator across from him leaned back in his chair and said, "Mr. Briggs, I want to be honest with you. What you've given us today is significant." Tom looked at his hands. "She had a sprained wrist," he said, "broken ribs, blood on her face, and she still made 3 phone calls before any of us figured out what to do next. He shook his head slowly. I've been in security for 22 years. I have never felt as outclassed by anyone as I felt watching her from that rooftop. The investigator wrote something down. And you feel remorse for your participation. I feel remorse, Tom said. I also feel something else that doesn't have a clean name. Something like, I don't know, like I underestimated what a person is capable of when they've decided the right thing is the right thing, and they're going to do it regardless. He paused. Victor never understood that about her. He thought she was a variable he could eliminate. He never once considered that she was a person who had already decided. The investigator put down his pen. Decided what? Tom thought about it. That she wasn't going to let a man die just because someone powerful wanted him to. That was, in the end, the simplest version of what all of this was about. A nurse who had seen something true on a monitor and had acted on it. And a CEO who had spent so many years in a position where his decisions went unquestioned that he had lost the ability to comprehend the possibility that one person, without power, without institutional authority, without anything except training and clarity, and the absolute refusal to be less than what she was, could dismantle everything he had built. The next morning, the story went public, not in fragments, not in the careful, hedged language of institutional press releases. In full. A reporter at the Seattle Times had a source inside the federal investigation, and by 7 in the morning there was a story online with Victor Haldren's name in the headline and the words, "Attempted murder," in the second paragraph. By 8, it had been picked up by national outlets. By 9, it was everywhere. Maya's name was not in the story. Not yet. The federal investigation had her identity protected as a cooperating witness. But the outline was there. A nurse, a rooftop, a CEO, a fall that should have been fatal, and a maintenance camera that had been in exactly the wrong place at exactly the right time. In the Crestview General ER, Donna read the story on her phone during a 5-minute gap between patients. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and sat with it for a moment. She had known, when she handed Maya that badge on her first morning, that there was something different about this person. She had not known what. She thought now about the 3 sentences Maya had said to her that morning. Her name, that she had completed her orientation packet, that she was ready to start. Ready to start. Donna almost laughed at that. Ready to start. She picked her phone back up and texted her daughter, who was a nursing student across the state, a single line. She wrote, "There are people in this profession who remind you exactly why you chose it." Her daughter texted back a question mark. Donna sent back, "You'll understand someday." At 10 that morning, Ronald Gibbs called an all-staff meeting in the hospital's main auditorium. It was standing room only. He stood at the front of the room, and he did not use prepared remarks, and he did not speak in the careful, liability-conscious language of institutional crisis communication. He spoke like a person. He said that what had happened was a betrayal of every principle that a hospital is supposed to stand for, that patient safety had been compromised not by accident, but by deliberate choices made by people in positions of trust, and that the board was committed to a full accounting of every decision that had been made under Victor Haldren's leadership. He said the names out loud. Victor Haldren, Tom Briggs, Patricia Howell, David Chen. He did not soften them or contextualize them. He just said them. Then he said something that was not in any script, because there was no script. He said, "There was a nurse who saved a patient's life in this building when she was told not to. She did it because it was right, and then she was attacked for it in the most brutal way I can imagine. She survived. And the reason you are all standing here today, the reason this institution has any chance of surviving this, is because she made 3 phone calls from a hospital balcony with broken ribs and a head injury. I want every person in this room to understand what that means about what kind of person she is." The room was completely silent. Someone in the back started clapping, then more people, then the entire room. Maya was not there to hear it. She was sitting in her apartment at her kitchen table, drinking black coffee and reading through the preliminary findings that Forsyth had sent her as a courtesy. A thick document full of financial details that she was working through systematically, not because she was looking for anything new, but because understanding the complete picture was part of how she processed things. She needed to see the whole shape of it. She needed to know what she had actually been standing in the middle of, because there is a difference between surviving something and understanding it, and Maya Carter had always needed both. The number that stopped her was $4,300,000. That was the current estimate of the fraud. She sat with that number for a moment. $4,300,000. 47 patient files used as vehicles. Hundreds of insurance claims for procedures that never happened. And at the center of it, a man who had once been a physician, who had once taken the same oath that everyone in that hospital had taken, who had understood the responsibility of that oath well enough to know exactly how to exploit the systems built around it. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. "Is this Maya Carter?" The voice was older, careful, a man choosing his words. "Who's asking?" she said. "My name is Gerald Whitman." A pause. "I believe you saved my life." Maya was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary morning. Cars, wind, the distant sound of a siren heading somewhere else. "You were in cardiac arrest," she said. "I saw a rhythm. I acted on it. My daughter told me what happened afterward." His voice had something in it that was not quite steadiness, something that was steadiness being maintained through effort. "She told me about the rooftop, about what they did to you." "Mr. Whitman, I want you to know," he said, and now the steadiness did crack slightly, just at the edges, the way it does when a person who has spent a lifetime being composed finally arrives at something that composition cannot entirely contain. "That I have been in that hospital bed for 3 weeks, thinking about the fact that there is a person walking around, or in your case apparently surviving 7-story falls, who made the decision that my life was worth saving when someone else had decided it was not. And I need to say that out loud to you directly, that I know that, and that it matters to me more than I have the words for." Maya sat very still. She had been thanked before. In the field, in the brief, compressed moments after a successful extraction, she had heard versions of this. She knew how to receive it without deflecting it, and without letting it become something larger than it was. A moment between two people that meant what it meant and did not need to be stretched beyond that. "I'm glad you're out of cardiac care," she said. "I'm told I have you entirely to thank for that." "You have your heart to thank for that," Maya said. "I just reminded it what it was supposed to be doing." Whitman was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "The billing fraud, the phantom consultation on my file. I had a lawyer review my medical records 2 months ago because something felt off. I had flagged it to the board, but nothing had come of it." He paused. "That was what made me a liability to him." Maya leaned forward slightly. "You knew about the billing irregularity." "I suspected. I had no proof. I was told it was an administrative error and that it had been corrected." Another pause. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Maya understood exactly what he was telling her. Gerald Whitman had raised a concern about billing irregularities with the hospital board 2 months ago, and somehow that concern had made it back to Victor. Not as a formal complaint, not through official channels, it had leaked. Someone on the board, or someone adjacent to the board, had told Victor that Whitman was looking at his file, and Victor, who was already managing the exposure from the frog, had seen an opportunity when Whitman arrived in cardiac arrest. She thought about that for a long moment. "Mr. Whitman, I need you to write down exactly what you told the board, who you told it to, and what response you received. Can you do that?" "I already have," he said. "I have a document. I can send it to the federal agents." Send it today, Maya said. Send it in the next hour. After she hung up, she sat for a long time. The shape of the thing she had been inside was larger than she had understood. It was not just a CEO protecting a fraud. It was a system that had been leaking information back to him. Someone on that board had told Victor that Whitman was a threat, and that meant the investigation had more ground to cover than anyone had yet fully mapped. She picked up her phone and called Forsyth. "There's a board member who gave Whitman up," she said the moment Forsyth answered. "He raised a billing concern 2 months ago through the board. Victor knew about it. Someone in that room told him." There was a brief silence on Forsyth's end. Then, "How confident are you in that?" "Whitman is sending you a document in the next hour," Maya said. "You'll be confident after you read it." She heard Forsyth exhale. Not dramatically, just the specific exhale of an investigator whose case, already significant, has just grown a dimension larger. "Maya," she said, "I want you to know something. In 15 years doing this work, I have handled a lot of cooperating witnesses. I have never had one call me to tell me something I didn't know before I knew I needed to know it." Maya almost smiled. Almost. "I just read the room," she said. "You always just read the room," Forsyth said. And there was something in her voice, genuine, unguarded, that was not quite professional admiration and not quite something else. Somewhere in the space between the two where real respect lives when it is not performing itself. Maya said goodbye, set the phone down, and looked at the document in front of her. $4,300,000, 47 patient files, one board member who had fed information back to a man who used it to try to end a person's life. And somewhere in that hospital, in those records, in the testimony of 4 people who were each now calculating very carefully what cooperation looked like, the full architecture of what Victor Haldren had built over 13 years was waiting to be seen completely for the first time. She picked up her pen. She kept reading. Gerald Whitman's document arrived in Forsyth's inbox at 11:43 that morning. It was 8 pages, single-spaced, written with the methodical clarity of a man who had spent 40 years in business and knew exactly how to construct a record that would hold up under scrutiny. He had dates. He had the name of the board member he had spoken to. He had a copy of the email he had sent flagging the billing irregularity, time-stamped, addressed to a board liaison named Richard Sato, and he had the response he had received 4 days later, a single paragraph telling him the matter had been reviewed and resolved and required no further attention. Signed by Sato, sent from Sato's official board email address. Forsyth read it twice. Then she called her supervisor. Richard Sato had been on the Crestview General Board of Directors for 6 years. He was 58 years old, a former healthcare consultant who had built a comfortable career in the space between institutional money and institutional decision-making. He was not a dramatic figure. He was not the kind of man whose name you would expect to find at the center of a federal investigation. He was the kind of man who existed in the background of powerful institutions, facilitating things, smoothing things, making sure information moved in the directions it needed to move. He had been exactly that for Victor Haldren for at least 4 of his 6 years on the board, and the fee he had received for that service, paid through a consulting arrangement so clean on its surface that 3 different accountants had looked at it and found nothing, amounted to just under $200,000 over those 4 years. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, Richard Sato was sitting in a federal office with a lawyer he had called in a panic 40 minutes earlier, and his face had the specific gray quality of a man who had spent years telling himself that what he was doing was not really what it was, and who had arrived all at once and with no gradual transition at the moment where that story no longer held. The investigator across from him set a copy of the Whitman document on the table. Sato looked at it. He did not touch it. "Mr. Sato," the investigator said, "I want to give you the opportunity to tell me in your own words about your relationship with Victor Haldren, and specifically about the conversation you had with Mr. Haldren after receiving Gerald Whitman's billing concern in September." Sato looked at his lawyer. His lawyer gave him a small, careful nod. Sato looked back at the table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want immunity." "That's a conversation for later," the investigator said. "Right now I need you to start talking." Sato talked. What he told them added a dimension to the case that even Forsyth had not fully anticipated. Because Richard Sato had not only passed Whitman's concern to Victor, he had also, over the course of 4 years, alerted Victor to at least 3 other situations where patients or staff had raised questions that touched the fraud in some way. Small things, mostly. A billing query from a family reviewing a deceased parent's records. A staff accountant who had flagged an anomaly and been quietly transferred to a different department before she could pursue it. A compliance review that had been scheduled and then, without explanation, postponed indefinitely. Each time the alert had come from Sato. Each time Victor had managed the situation. Each time the thread had been cut before it could be pulled. The accountant who had been transferred was a woman named Susan Park, no relation to Howard Park, who was now working at a hospital in Portland, and who, when a federal agent called her that afternoon, picked up the phone and said, before the agent had finished identifying herself, "I have been waiting for this call for 2 years." Susan Park had kept everything, not on hospital systems, on a personal hard drive, backed up in 2 locations, because Susan Park had grown up in a household where her father, a union organizer in the 1980s, had taught her from childhood that when you find something wrong inside a powerful institution, you document it before you say a word to anyone, because the institution will always move to protect itself faster than it will move to protect you. She had 47 documents, spreadsheets, email threads, screenshots of authorization pathways that should not have existed. 2 years of meticulous, painstaking record-keeping by a woman who had been quietly moved out of her job for getting too close to the truth, and who had spent every day since waiting for the moment when what she knew would matter to someone who could do something with it. When Forsyth reviewed the package Susan Park sent over that afternoon, she sat back in her chair and was still for a long moment. Then she said to the agent beside her, "The $4,300,000 figure. I think we're going to need to revise that upward." The agent looked at the documents on her screen. "By how much?" Forsyth shook her head slowly. "I don't know yet, but Susan Park was tracking this for 2 years before she was transferred. Whatever happened in those 2 years before she started tracking it, that's what we don't have yet." Back at Crestview General, the day was moving with the particular fractured quality of an institution trying to function normally, while everything around it was changing. Patients still arrived. Procedures still happened. The ER did not stop because the CEO had been arrested. If anything, the floor ran better that day than it had in weeks, because Tom Briggs was gone, and the security protocols he had put in place that served institutional control rather than patient care had been quietly suspended by Howard Park, who had spent the morning in the administrative level with 2 board members and the hospital's compliance director going through every policy that had been implemented under Victor's tenure. Donna ran the ER floor with the steady efficiency she had maintained for 19 years, and if she was processing something emotionally, she was processing it the way she processed everything, by keeping her hands moving and her mind on the patient in front of her. At 3 in the afternoon, she took a 5-minute break in the hallway outside the supply room, which was the closest thing to private space available in an ER, and she called her daughter again. This time, she did not send a text. She actually called. "Mom?" Her daughter picked up, sounding surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," Donna said. "I just needed to hear your voice for a minute." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She leaned against the wall. "I had a nurse here. She started 3 weeks ago. She was here for 3 weeks and she saved a patient's life and then survived something that should have killed her. And then she took down a fraud operation that had been running for 4 years, all before breakfast." She paused. "I'm just calling because I want to tell you that the work you're doing matters. Even when it's hard, even when it feels like no one sees it, It matters. Her daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, are you crying?" Donna straightened up. "Absolutely not. I have patience. I'll talk to you tonight." She hung up before her daughter could say anything else and went back to work. At 4:15, Victor Haldren's attorney arrived at the federal detention facility where Victor had been processed that morning. His name was Martin Feld, and he was a very good attorney, the kind that powerful people retain before they need them, because the kind of trouble powerful people get into rarely announces itself in advance. Martin Feld had represented Victor in 3 civil matters over the past 8 years and had never lost. He was calm, well-dressed, and methodical. And when he sat down across from Victor in the consultation room, his first words were professional and precise. "Tell me exactly what you told them when they arrested you," he said. "Nothing," Victor said. "I asked where she was. That was all." Feld made a note. "Good. Now I need you to understand the landscape. The footage exists, and it is in federal custody. It cannot be suppressed. Briggs is cooperating. Howell is cooperating. Sato has been brought in, which means they have the board connection. And a former staff accountant in Portland has apparently been sitting on 2 years of documentation that our billing scheme did not account for." Victor was very still. "Susan Park." Feld looked up from his notes. "You know her. I had her transferred. I thought the matter was handled." "It was not handled," Feld said, with the flat patience of a man delivering information to a client who is only now beginning to understand the true dimensions of a problem. "She kept everything. She has been waiting for an opportunity to bring it forward. The opportunity arrived yesterday evening when your CEO position became a past tense item." He set his pen down. "Victor, I need to talk to you about what cooperation looks like in this context." Victor looked at his attorney. He had the expression of a man who has not slept and who is running entirely on the kind of cold, interior resource that has sustained him for decades. The absolute refusal to let the exterior crack. "I am not cooperating," he said. "I'm not suggesting you confess to everything and throw yourself on the mercy of the court," Feld said. "I'm suggesting that the evidence against you is substantial enough that fighting all of it will result in the maximum possible outcome. There are ways to engage with this that preserve some degree of—" "Martin." Victor's voice was quiet, controlled. "I built that hospital. I built it from a mid-tier regional facility into one of the most recognized names in Pacific Northwest healthcare. I raised the capital. I negotiated the partnerships. I made the decisions that no one else had the stomach for. I am not going to sit in a room and perform contrition for a federal investigator so that I can spend 9 years in prison instead of 15. Feld looked at him for a long moment. "Then you should understand that 15 is a conservative estimate." Victor said nothing. "The attempted murder charge alone carries significant exposure. The fraud charges, given the scale and duration, will be federal. And if they establish that Sato's involvement constitutes a conspiracy that extends beyond the 4 people on the rooftop, the picture becomes considerably more complex." Feld picked his pen back up. "I will represent you to the best of my ability. That is what you're paying me for. But I need you to hear me when I tell you that the evidence in this case is not a matter of interpretation. It is footage. It is documents. It is 4 cooperating witnesses. It is a former staff member with 2 years of records. And it is a nurse who gave a 47-page statement this morning without a single inconsistency." Victor looked at the table between them. "She was supposed to be gone," he said, quietly, almost to himself. 6 years of classified military service, and I thought I had contained it." "You did not contain it," Feld said. "That is the situation we are managing." There was a silence between them. Then Victor said, "How is Whitman?" Feld looked up. "The patient?" "Yes. He's out of cardiac care. He's expected to make a full recovery." Victor nodded once. Something moved across his face that was too brief and too complicated to name cleanly. Not regret in any simple sense, Something more like the recognition a person has when they finally see, completely and without defense, the full consequence of a choice they made a long time ago. It lasted only a second. Then his expression closed back down. "Let's talk about the arraignment," he said. Maya spent the afternoon in her apartment, but she was not resting. She was on the phone, and she was reading, and she was thinking through the shape of what the investigation had become, with the focused intensity of someone who understands that surviving a thing and resolving a thing are two different tasks, and that the second one is not finished just because the first one is. She had spoken to Forsyth 3 times. She had reviewed Susan Park's document summary, which Forsyth had sent her as a courtesy, with the note that Maya's initial read of the situation had been exactly right, and then some. She had called Ronald Gibbs back and given him a precise summary of the Sato connection and what it meant for the board's own liability in the situation. Gibbs had been quiet on the phone for a long time after she finished. Then he said, "Richard Sato has been on this board for 6 years. I have sat in rooms with this man for 6 years. I know," Maya said. "I recommended him for the finance subcommittee 2 years ago." "I know," she said again. "Maya, I need to ask you something." His voice had shifted into something more personal than his previous register. Less the board chairman, more the person underneath that role. "How did you know? From the beginning, how did you know that what you were walking into at Crestview was this?" Maya thought about how to answer that honestly. "I didn't know it was this," she said. "I knew something was off. The repositioned cameras, the timing of the credential concern, the way Patricia Howell spoke to me, like she was delivering a message she'd been given rather than expressing a genuine concern. These were signals. I read signals. That's what I was trained to do." "But you stayed," Gibbs said. "Knowing something was off, you stayed." "A man was alive who should be alive," Maya said simply. "I wasn't going to walk away from that because someone was making things uncomfortable." Another silence. Then Gibbs said very quietly, "I want you to know that this board, the board that should have caught this years ago, owes you more than I know how to say. I also want you to know that what you said to me about the maintenance camera in that first phone call from the balcony, with everything that had just happened to you, that was the most clear-headed communication I have ever received from anyone under any circumstances in my entire career. And I have been in this industry for 40 years. Maya did not respond to the compliment. Instead, she said, "There's something else we need to talk about. The compliance review that was postponed, the one that Sato helped defer. That review needs to happen, all the way through, not just the billing, the staffing decisions, the transfer of Susan Park, the anonymous complaint that was filed against me in my first week. Every administrative decision Victor made that touched patient care or staff safety needs to be reviewed by an independent body with no institutional connection to Crestview." "Agreed," Gibbs said without hesitation. "And the whistleblower protection policy," Maya said, "whatever exists right now is inadequate. Susan Park documented fraud for 2 years and held on to it in her personal files because she didn't believe the institution would protect her if she came forward. That is a structural failure that predates Victor Haldren and will outlast him if the board doesn't treat it as a priority." "I hear you. I'm not looking for acknowledgement, Mr. Gibbs. I'm telling you what needs to happen." He almost laughed. "Almost." "No," he said, "you are absolutely right, and it will happen. I'm going to need your help to make it happen the right way." "I'll help," she said, "after I sleep." She hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Her ribs ached with the deep, bone-level ache of injuries that were going to be demanding her attention for several more weeks, regardless of what she chose to do about them. Her wrist was stiff inside the brace. The butterfly closure above her eye pulled tightly every time she changed expression. She was aware of all of it, cataloging it the way she cataloged everything, with the practical clarity of someone who has learned that pain is information and not a story. She got up, made more coffee, stood at the window for a moment. The city outside moved through its afternoon with the ordinary indifference of cities, enormous and continuous and entirely unconcerned with the specific gravity of what any individual within it was carrying. She thought about the first day she had walked into the ER, the cold morning, the paper cup of black coffee, the 3 sentences she had said to Donna. She thought about Gerald Whitman's face, gray and slack on the gurney, the way the monitor had shown her something true when everyone else in the room was already looking away. She thought about Victor standing in the doorway of that trauma bay, looking at her with the expression she now understood completely, the expression of a man who had just identified something that threatened the architecture of his control. She wondered, briefly, if there had been any version of this where things went differently, where Victor had simply let the moment pass, where she had done her job and he had done his, and nobody's life had been altered irreversibly by a single decision on a rooftop on a cold Tuesday night. She turned the thought over once, examined it, then set it down. That version had not happened. This version had. And this version, with all its damage and pain and cascading consequence, had also resulted in a fraud operation being dismantled, a patient living, a staff accountant's 2 years of careful documentation finally reaching the people who could use it, and 4 people who had stood on a rooftop and decided another human being was expendable, now facing the full legal weight of that decision. There was a knock at her door. She set down her coffee, moved to the door, opened it. Priya was standing in the hallway holding a container of food. She looked at Maya's face, at the butterfly closure, at the brace on her wrist. Her own expression did a complicated thing, cycling through surprise and distress, and something that settled finally into the particular determined warmth of a person who has decided that whatever the situation requires, she is going to show up for it. "Donna made me bring this," Priya said. "She said you hadn't eaten." "How does Donna know I haven't eaten?" "Donna knows everything," Priya said. "Are you going to let me in, or are we doing this in the hallway?" Maya stepped back from the door. Priya came in and set the container on the kitchen table and looked around the apartment, which was sparse and orderly, and had on the table a collection of documents and a legal pad covered in Maya's precise handwriting that told a story of its own about how Maya Carter had been spending her recovery time. Priya looked at all of it. Then she looked at Maya. "The whole hospital knows," she said, "not just the outline, the real version. Someone talked." "Someone always talks," Maya said. "Kevin cried," Priya said. "I'm not supposed to tell you that, but I feel like you should know." Maya sat down at the table. "Is he all right?" "He's fine, he's just, he's Kevin." Priya sat down across from her. She looked at Maya with the directness of someone who has decided she is done with indirect approaches. "I want to ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business." "Ask." "Were you scared? On the rooftop, when there were 4 of them?" Maya thought about it honestly. "I was calculating," she said. "That's not the same as not scared." "No," Maya said, "it's not." Priya nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, what you did, all of it, the Whitman resuscitation, the phone calls, the statement, all of it, it changed something in that building. I don't mean just the investigation, I mean the people in it. The way they're looking at each other, the way they're talking about what this place is supposed to be." She paused. "Donna said the new nurses are already calling you something." Maya looked at her. "What are they calling me?" Priya almost smiled. "The one who stayed." Maya was quiet for a moment. Outside, the afternoon was beginning to soften toward evening. Somewhere in a federal detention facility across the city, Victor Haldren was sitting with his attorney and beginning to understand the true dimensions of what he had set in motion. Somewhere in Portland, Susan Park was on a phone call with a federal agent, reading from 47 documents she had kept for 2 years against exactly this moment. And somewhere in the cardiac care unit at Crestview General, Gerald Whitman was sitting up in his hospital bed with his daughter beside him, alive, which was the whole point, the entire point, the only point that had ever actually mattered. Eat something, Priya said. Donna's orders. Maya opened the container. She ate. The ribs healed slower than Maya wanted them to. That was the honest truth of it, and Maya Carter dealt in honest truths, so she acknowledged it and adjusted accordingly. 6 weeks after the night on the rooftop, she was still waking up at 3 in the morning with a deep pull of pain across her left side that no amount of discipline could entirely override. She would lie in the dark for a few minutes, breathe through it, take stock of what was functional and what was not, and then get up and make coffee and sit at the table where the documents had been replaced by medical journals and nursing protocol reviews she was working through for reasons that would become clear shortly. The wrist had healed faster. The cut above her eye had closed cleanly, leaving a thin line that Priya told her looked, and this was a direct quote, honestly kind of distinguished. Maya had not responded to that. What she had been doing in those 6 weeks, beyond healing, was working. Not at the hospital, not yet. Her return had been discussed, but not finalized. There were institutional conversations still in progress, and Maya had no interest in rushing back before the ground was stable. What she had been doing was something different. Agent Forsyth had asked her, 3 days after the arrest, whether she would be willing to consult on the ongoing investigation as it expanded into the full scope of the billing fraud. Not as a witness, as someone with direct institutional knowledge who could help the investigative team understand how the authorization pathways inside the hospital had been structured and exploited. Maya had said yes. She had conditions. She listed them precisely. Forsyth agreed to all of them without negotiating, which told Maya that Forsyth had already expected those exact conditions. The investigation had grown considerably since that first morning. Susan Park's documents had proven to be exactly what Forsyth suspected, a window into a period of the fraud that predated everything the initial billing review had captured. The revised total, after 6 weeks of forensic accounting, stood at $7,100,000, not $4,300,000. $7,100,000 spread across 5.5 years, touching 93 patient files, billed across 4 insurance carriers, routed through a network of shell entities that David Chen had constructed with genuine sophistication over a period of years. When the revised figure was announced in the federal filing, it landed differently than the original number had. 4 million had been shocking. 7 million crossed into a territory that felt almost abstract until you broke it down into the individual patient files, the real names, the real families, the real people who had been used as instruments in someone else's financial architecture without their knowledge or consent. The prosecuting attorney's office had made a deliberate decision to include a list of all 93 names in the public filing. Not their details, just their names. A column of 93 names that ran down 3 pages of a legal document and said everything that needed to be said about the human scale of what Victor Haldren had built. Maya read that list carefully. She did not know most of the names. She knew one. Gerald Whitman, line 47. She read his name, and then she read the ones above and below it, and she thought about each of them as a person, not a file number, not a line item, a person who had come to a hospital in a moment of vulnerability and had been used. She thought about that for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called Ronald Gibbs. The conversation she had been building toward for 6 weeks was finally ready to happen. Not because she had been avoiding it, because she had needed the full shape of the investigation to be visible before she could speak to what came next with the precision it required. Gibbs answered on the first ring, which told her he had been waiting. "The revised figure is public," she said. "I saw it this morning," he said. His voice was tired, not broken, just the specific exhaustion of a man who has spent 6 weeks inside a reckoning. 93 patients, Maya. I know. When I think about how long this was happening inside this institution, while we sat in board meetings and approved budgets and talked about our commitment to patient care. "Mr. Gibbs," she said, not unkindly, "I did not call to talk about what should have happened. I called to talk about what happens now. He was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled. Tell me. She told him. She had been thinking about it for 6 weeks, refining it, pressure testing it the way she pressure tested everything, looking for the weak points and addressing them before they could become failures. What she proposed was not complicated. It was thorough. An independent patient safety office with real authority, not an advisory function, but a structural one, with a direct reporting line to the board that bypassed the executive suite entirely. A whistleblower protection policy with teeth, legal protection, financial protection, job security protection, the kind that Susan Park would have felt safe using 2 years ago instead of a personal hard drive and a prayer. A mandatory independent billing audit every 18 months, conducted by a firm with no institutional connection to the hospital, and a patient advocacy coordinator in the ER specifically, someone whose sole job was to be the voice of the patient when the institutional hierarchy became too loud. Gibbs listened to all of it. He asked 4 questions, all of them specific and good. Maya answered each one. When she finished, he said, "The board will pass all of this. I can tell you that with confidence. There may be modifications in the detail, but the structure you're describing, yes, unanimously." "Good," she said. "There is also a conversation we need to have about your role going forward," Gibbs said. "And I want to be clear that this is not an obligation. This is an offer. The board has discussed it, and we are unanimous on this as well." Maya waited. "We want you to come back," he said. "Not as a staff nurse, although that door is also open. We want to offer you a newly created position, Director of Patient Safety and Head of the Emergency Department. Full authority over the Patient Safety Office you just described. Final sign-off on ER protocols. A seat at the table when institutional decisions touch patient care or staff welfare. Real authority, not ceremonial." He paused. "You would be building something from the ground up in a hospital that is very motivated to get it right." Maya was quiet for a moment. "I want it in writing," she said. "The authority, not just the title, the actual decision-making power specified in the contract." "Done," Gibbs said. "And I want Susan Park offered a position in the compliance office, senior level. She earned it." A pause. "I'll bring it to the board." "Bring it as a recommendation from me," Maya said. She kept those records for 2 years because she knew the right thing, and she held on to it when holding on to it cost her something real. That is exactly the kind of person this institution needs. "Agreed," Gibbs said. And then, after a moment, softer, "Maya, I want to ask you something personal, and you can decline to answer." "Ask. Why come back at all? You could go anywhere. With what you've done here, what you've demonstrated you're capable of, any institution in this country would want you. Why Crestview?" Maya thought about it. Not because she didn't know the answer, because she wanted to say it accurately. "Because the problem I came here to solve isn't solved yet," she said. "Gerald Whitman is alive. That was the first problem. The second problem is the 93 people on that list, and the 100 people after them who will come through that ER door and need to know that the institution they are walking into is what it is supposed to be. That problem is not solved. I don't leave problems unsolved." Gibbs did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had something in it that was beyond professional. Something that a man earns the right to express only after a great deal of experience has shown him exactly how rare certain qualities are. "No," he said quietly. "I don't imagine you do." The arraignment had happened 4 weeks earlier. Victor Haldren had stood before a federal judge in a courtroom that was full because the press had covered every development in the case with the thoroughness reserved for stories that touched something deep in the public understanding of power and accountability. He had entered a plea of not guilty on all counts, which surprised no one. His attorney, Martin Feld, stood beside him with the composed professionalism of someone doing the job they were paid to do, regardless of the mathematics of the situation. The judge set bail at a figure that reflected the flight risk assessment, and Victor did not make bail. He was remanded to custody pending trial. Tom Briggs had entered a guilty plea 3 weeks after his arrest, on the advice of his lawyer and in accordance with a cooperation agreement that reduced his exposure significantly. He would serve time, not as much as the others. His sentencing was scheduled for a date 3 months out. On the day he entered his plea, he stood in the courtroom, and when the judge asked him whether he understood the charges to which he was pleading guilty, he said yes, clearly and without hesitation. Afterward, in the hallway outside the courtroom, his wife was waiting for him. She had been there for every proceeding. She held his hand on the way to the car, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the past several weeks had not already said more completely than words could manage. Patricia Howell's case had taken a different shape. Her attorney had negotiated extensively, and the cooperation she had provided was substantial enough that the prosecuting office had agreed to a significantly reduced charge. What nobody had expected, not her attorney, not the prosecutors, not the investigators who had interviewed her, was what Patricia did the week before her plea was finalized. She wrote a letter, not to the court, not to her attorney. She wrote a letter to every nurse at Crestview General Hospital. 7 pages, handwritten, that her attorney advised her not to send, and that she sent anyway. In it, she told them what she had done, specifically and without euphemism. She told them she had filed a complaint against Maya Carter in her first week because Victor asked her to, and because she had told herself it was a small thing, just a small administrative thing, just a note in a file. She told them she had understood on some level that the Rooftop meeting was not what it was presented as, and that she had told herself it was just going to be a conversation, a serious conversation, a warning, and that she had been lying to herself, and she had known she was lying to herself, and she had gone up there anyway. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she was not sure she deserved it. She said the only thing she knew for certain was that Patricia Howell at 51 was not the person she had intended to be at 25 when she first put on scrubs, and that understanding that fully and publicly was the only honest thing she had left to offer. Donna read the letter in the break room at 6 in the morning before her shift started. She read it all the way through without stopping. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her locker, and she stood at the locker for a moment with her hand on the door. Then she closed it and went to work. David Chen's case was the most legally complex of the 4. His attorneys had fought every piece of evidence with the full force of a legal team that was very good and very expensive, and ultimately unable to overcome the specific problem that the evidence against him was extraordinary in its completeness. Susan Park's documents covered his authorization pathways with the kind of specificity that left almost nothing to interpretation. By the time the trial preparation reached its most intensive phase, Chen had shifted from aggressive defense to damage mitigation, a shift that his lead attorney communicated to the prosecuting office through channels that were professional and efficient, and that resulted in a cooperation agreement that Chen signed without the dramatic resistance he had initially projected. Richard Sato, the board member who had funneled information to Victor for 4 years, had his own proceeding. His cooperation had been early and detailed, which worked in his favor in the legal calculus, but what it could not protect him from was the consequence inside the professional world he had inhabited for 30 years. He resigned from the board the day after he gave his statement. He resigned from 2 other board positions the following week. The healthcare consulting firm that bore his name was dissolved by the end of the month. He did not make public statements. He did not give interviews. He simply contracted, professionally and publicly, from the space he had occupied, and the space closed behind him the way spaces do when the person occupying them is revealed to have been there for the wrong reasons. The trial date was set for 7 months out. Maya would testify. She had been told this from the beginning, and she had acknowledged it with the same lack of drama she brought to everything. She would sit in that witness stand and she would answer every question with the same precision and completeness she had brought to the 47-page statement on the morning after the rooftop. And the jury would hear what they needed to hear, and the outcome would be what the evidence made it. She did not spend time thinking about the trial. She spent her time thinking about the work. She went back to Crestview General on a Monday morning in January. Cold again, the way Seattle is in January, sharp and gray and direct. She walked through the main entrance of the emergency department, carrying a paper cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Different from the first morning in ways that were visible and in ways that were not. The butterfly closure above her eye was gone, just the thin line now. The brace was gone. She moved with a slight, careful quality of someone still managing a healing rib, though most people would not have noticed it. Donna was at the nursing station. She looked up when Maya came through the door. She did not say anything dramatic. She did not make a speech. She looked at Maya for a moment the way she had looked at her on that first morning, with the specific assessment of someone who has spent 19 years reading people. And then she handed her a badge and said, "Glad you're back." "Glad to be back," Maya said. She meant it. Without qualification or complexity, she meant it. Kevin was in the corridor and stopped dead when he saw her, which was so sincere and unguarded that Maya felt something she did not often feel. A warmth that was not embarrassment exactly, but was adjacent to it. The warmth of being seen clearly by someone who is not trying to see you as anything other than what you are. He said her name once. She said his. He nodded, pressed his lips together, and went back to what he had been doing. That was exactly right. Priya hugged her, which Maya had not anticipated and which she did not move away from. Her office, the new one, the one that corresponded to the new title and the new role and the new authority that had been specified in the contract, in the precise language she had requested, was at the end of the administrative corridor on the second floor, close enough to the ER that she could be on the floor in under 3 minutes, which was a logistical requirement she had insisted on when the space was being assigned. It was not a large office. It did not need to be. There was a desk, a chair, 2 chairs for visitors, and a whiteboard that was already covered in her handwriting from the hours she had spent there the previous Friday doing the initial structural planning for the patient safety office. On the desk was an envelope, no return address. She opened it. Inside was a single card, handwritten. Gerald Whitman's handwriting, she recognized it from the document he had sent to Forsyth. It said, "I read that you are returning to Crestview today. I wanted you to know that my family and I think about what you did every single day. Not just for me, for all of them. The 93 names. You gave them something that no one else was willing to give them. Someone who stayed." She read it twice. She set it on the desk. She did not put it away. She left it there where she could see it. Then she opened her laptop and got to work. The Patient Safety Office framework took 4 months to build correctly. Not because it was complicated. The design was clear. Maya had been thinking about it for months before she started building it. But because building something real inside an institution means working through every layer of that institution, the resistant layers and the cooperative layers and the layers that are neutral until they understand what is being asked of them, and then become one or the other. Maya moved through all of those layers with the same patience and the same precision she brought to everything. She had difficult conversations. She had them directly and without hedging, and she did not soften the parts that needed to stay hard. She restructured 3 existing reporting lines that had been directing information away from accountability rather than toward it. She rewrote the incident reporting protocol from the ground up. She hired 4 people, each chosen for a specific quality she had identified as structurally missing from the institution. Susan Park accepted the compliance position on a Wednesday afternoon, by phone, from her apartment in Portland. She said yes before the offer was fully completed. Then she said, "Can I ask who pushed for this?" And when Maya told her, Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I kept those records for 2 years. Every day I kept them, I thought I might be doing it for nothing." Another pause. "Thank you for making sure it wasn't for nothing." "You did the work," Maya said. I just made sure it landed. The trial of Victor Haldren began on a Thursday morning in September, 10 months after the night on the rooftop. The courtroom was full. Maya sat in the witness area and she waited. When her name was called, she walked to the stand with the particular quality of posture that people who have been trained under extreme conditions carry even in ordinary ones. Not stiff, just completely present, every part of her pointing in the same direction. She took the oath. She sat down. She looked at the prosecuting attorney. She answered every question. For 3.5 hours, she answered questions about what she had seen and what she had done and what she knew. She answered them the same way she had answered them 10 months ago in that federal office. Directly, completely, without embellishment and without omission. When the defense attorney cross-examined her, she answered those questions the same way. Victor's attorney was skilled, and he tried several different approaches, and each time Maya met him with the same steady, factual clarity that gave him nothing to work with. Because there was nothing to work with, because what she was saying was true, and she was saying it precisely, and the truth stated precisely, is a wall that even very good attorneys cannot find a door through. At one point during the cross-examination, Martin Feld asked her whether she had knowingly walked into a situation she understood to be dangerous. She said yes. He asked whether that was consistent with responsible professional conduct. She looked at him and said, "It was consistent with making sure that what happened could be documented and prosecuted. That was my assessment of what the situation required." He tried to use that answer to suggest she had behaved recklessly. The prosecuting attorney objected. The objection was sustained. Maya kept her eyes on Feld the whole time, not hostile, just present, the way she was always present. Victor Haldren watched her from the defense table for the entirety of her testimony. He sat with the same controlled stillness he had maintained through every public proceeding, the exterior that had never fully cracked. But Maya, who had spent 10 months thinking about the full architecture of what he had built and what he had destroyed, understood something about that stillness now that she had not understood on the rooftop. It was not strength. It was the last remaining structure of a man who had used control as a substitute for character for so long that without it, there was nothing underneath. The stillness was not composure. It was the absence of anything else. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On a Tuesday afternoon in late September, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, healthcare fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice. The judge read each count and each verdict into the record with the flat, procedural clarity of someone who has presided over many such moments and who understands that the weight of them belongs to the people in the room, not to the language used to describe them. In the gallery, Ronald Gibbs sat with Howard Park. Neither of them spoke. Susan Park was there, in the third row, with her hands folded in her lap, and an expression of something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but lived in the territory between them where justice settles when it finally arrives after a long time in transit. Tom Briggs was not in the courtroom. He was home, which was where his plea agreement allowed him to be pending sentencing, and where his wife had been steady beside him through every difficult week of the preceding 10 months. He heard the verdict from a news alert on his phone. He set the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with it for a moment. Then he got up and went to find his wife. Patricia Howell heard it the same way, alone in a small apartment she had moved to after leaving the house she and her ex-husband had owned. A new small life built on the other side of a decision she could not take back, but could continue to account for. She read the alert twice. Then she looked out the window for a long time. Her kids were coming for dinner on Friday. She had been cooking again, which she had not done in the dark months after the arrest. Small thing, but real. David Chen did not react publicly. He had already been sentenced as part of his cooperation agreement and was serving his time, and the verdict against Victor was in his file, but not in his daily reality. He had more immediate things to manage. Richard Sato read the verdict from his home outside the city. He closed his laptop afterward and sat in the quiet of a life that had contracted completely around him. And he thought about the conversation he had had with Victor Haldren 9 months ago, the one where he passed on Gerald Whitman's billing concern, the one that had set in motion everything that followed. He thought about the moment he made that call. He thought about how simple it had felt, how small, how entirely manageable. Victor Haldren received 15 years. He stood for the sentencing with the same stillness he had maintained throughout. He did not speak during the allocution portion of the proceedings, which was his right. He listened to the judge's statement, which was measured and clear, and which described the harm done to patients, to staff, to the institution of medicine itself, in terms that did not require elevation because the facts elevated themselves. When the judge finished, Victor was remanded to custody. He walked out of the courtroom between two officers, and the door closed behind him. In the room began the slow, quiet process of exhaling 10 months of held breath. Maya was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. She had testified months earlier, and her presence was not required. And she had made a decision, deliberate and clear-eyed, that the sentencing was not something she needed to witness to consider the matter closed. She was in the ER, where she was supposed to be, where she had been every day for the past 4 months, building the thing that needed to be built, training the people who needed to be trained, reading the room the way she had always read every room, with the full attention of someone who understood that the most important moment is always the one directly in front of you. She heard the verdict from Priya, who appeared in the doorway of her office at 2:17 in the afternoon, with her phone in her hand and her eyes bright, and said simply, 15 years, guilty on everything. Maya looked up from the protocol document she was reviewing. She held the information for a moment, not performing stillness, actually still, the way she had always been still, because the ground beneath her was solid and had been solid for a long time and was not going to shift because a verdict had come in. Thank you, she said. Priya nodded. She started to leave. Then she stopped in the doorway. Maya, for what it's worth, and I know you don't really need people to tell you things like this, but I want to say it anyway. She paused. What you did, all of it, the Whitman resuscitation, the rooftop, the calls, the statement, the office you built, all of it, it changed what this hospital is. It changed what I think a person can do when they decide to do it. She stopped again. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Maya looked at her. It's worth something, she said. Thank you. Priya left. Maya turned back to her desk. The card from Gerald Whitman was still there, where she had left it on her first day back. She read the last line of it one more time, the way she had read it dozens of times over the past 4 months. Not for comfort, but because it said something true that she wanted to keep within reach. Someone who stayed. She set it back down, picked up her pen, went back to work. Because there was always more work. Because the 93 names on that list deserved a hospital that had actually learned something. Because the next nurse who walked through that ER door with something true to say deserved an institution that was built to hear it. Because Gerald Whitman was alive and living his life, and every day that was true was the reason she had become a nurse in the first place, and the reason she would keep being one for as long as she was standing. Maya Carter had never needed the story to be about her. She had only ever needed it to end the right way. It did.